Georges-Pierre Seurat was born in Paris on December 2nd, 1859. Georges' father, a former officer, gained a fortune investing in property and lived his eccentric life on his estate, only visiting his wife and children once a week. His mother was from an aristocratic family that had produced several well-known sculptors, and sent her children to study sculpture under Justin Lequin. Seurat later studied under Henry Lehmann, where he became educated in the traditional classic methods and theories of art, including color. Seurat spent much of his early years developing his own style and visiting museums where he studied a variety of styles and artists. He became very interested in color theory and the science of optics, and its implications on art after reading The Principles of Harmony and Contrasts of Color by Seurat. Impressionism was a form of 19th century art that developed in Paris surrounding independent art exhibitions. Characteristics of Impressionism include very visible small brushstrokes, open composition, emphasis on ever-changing qualities of light and time, domestic subjects, emphasis on the artistic element of movement, and unusual viewing angles. The style gets its name from a piece by Claude Monet called Impression, Sunrise, which came from a critical satirical review by Louis Leroy. Impressionism came with a harsh opposition by conventional artists in Paris. Leroy himself would end up writing, "Impression, I was certain of it. I was just telling myself that, since I was impressed, there had to be some impression in it. And what freedom, what ease of workmanship. A preliminary drawing of a wallpaper pattern is more finished than this seascape." Impressionism's last exhibition gave rise to a short-lived movement called Fauvism, which was characterized by a heightened painterly style and literally means the wild in French. Fauvism was followed by Post-Impressionism. Post-Impressionism was born in 1868 to 1905. It took a step back from the Impressionists' emphasis on the natural depictions of light and developed a more symbolic style. These people were influenced by Impressionist styles, but denied the limitations the development of the style outlined. They used vivid, unnatural, or arbitrary colors, distortions of form, and thick application of paint. Seurat wanted to abandon the Impressionist focus on the fleeting moments of life and render the unchangeable elements of life. He borrowed many elements of his style from Impressionism, such as the relationship between colors and urban subject matter. He became obsessed with the science of color. He believed that colors could be rendered more vibrant by the optical mixing of colors to create a local color of a subject. Seurat developed a method called chromoluminarism, which is now described as either divisionism or pointillism. This method separates colors into dots that, when looked at from a distance, create a local color. Seurat's style, though unusual and progressive, still contained neoclassical elements. Being brought up with traditional artists, he still composed his paintings as inspired by classical reliefs. His actual subject matter, however, borrows from the Impressionist idea of depicting leisure activities enjoyed by the French bourgeois. His first major work, Bathers in Anières, is an example of this. As opposed to the highly pointillist techniques he used in his later work, Bather shows a simplified, more blended brushstroke. This piece was still rejected by the Salon for being too outside of traditional art, despite the about 14 separate oil studies he had done. He left this neoclassical influence behind in his later works, however. Seurat became greatly influenced by caricature and developed a fairly stylized approach. In this stage of life, he became involved with surrealist contemporaries. At this stage in his work, he produced A Sunday Afternoon on the Islands of La Grande Jatte, likely one of his most famous works. The main interpretation was proposed by a Marxist historian, interpreting it as a statement about the class system and the pravity of the bourgeoisie in France. Sunday Afternoon launched the movement of Neo-Impressionism, which used the science of color and pointillism. It is considered by some to be the first avant-garde painting. This work was also a great influence to Cubist artists in the 1900s, as it was highly stylized and rigid. It also influenced Orifism, which had to do greatly with color theory. Seurat spent much of his adult life concealing a relationship with one of his models, Madeleine Noblec, with whom he had 2 children. He died in 1891 of an unknown illness. Anything from meningitis, pneumonia, infectious angina, and diphtheria have been suggested. His son died 2 weeks later from a similar illness, and his youngest son died shortly after birth.